Hey, what's up? This is Jake here in Jake's shop. So today I'm going to go ahead and do some door pins on these hinges for the '69 Camaro. I'm not going to go through taking over the doors and how that works. Luckily the fenders are off. It makes it much easier, and taking the hinges out. So basically I'm going to go through how just to do the pins and the bushings in these things, at least how I do it. Some little bit of information that I hope is helpful. So we'll go on to the next step, and I'll show you what I'm doing tonight in the shop. Thanks. Okay, so here's the hinges. I went ahead and did one set first to kind of show you what it looks like when they're done. These are the upper and lower hinges for the Camaro doors on the '69. You know, before I go putting the doors back on and trying to get things lined up, if there's too much slack in those hinges, they wobble back and forth. You know, this is the lower hinge, I believe, upper on the driver's side. But anyways, there's a pin in there, right? And you can kind of see how it wobbles around. So, and that's actually not that bad. I've seen them quite a bit worse, but there's a trick to getting these out of here. These are press fit from the factory. You can kind of see these little wings on here. There's some sort of a swedging machine that came down and swedged these up. You know, the top side has a pin, and you can see this little bit here. This is part of an old bushing, and it's wobbled out over time. The spring side is actually a lot worse. You know, those are the ones that once these start getting loose, then they eventually work themselves into these hinges. So these ones, you know, these are all done. So anyways, the first thing is getting these off of here. So I'll go, I'll show you a little bit of what I did. You know, those are the new components that came in the box. I just used my cutoff wheel and very carefully just cut off the wings on this thing and actually cut the whole thing flush. And I was actually able, sometimes these have to be pressed out. I was actually able, you know, I clamped these in my vise and just beat them out with a pin, and they came out pretty easily. So I'm going to go ahead and do that first step in the process and then kind of show you what it looks like after it's out. You know, they're not the, you know, there's actually a swedge in here, and you'll see that in the new pins. You can kind of see that area right there. When these press back in or push back in, that kind of bites into the steel on this piece. These pieces usually don't wobble out. Usually they're good. It's this inner part that wobbles out, and where those new bushings will go. If you have so much of a hole where the new bushings are loose inside there, there's a couple things you can do. You actually add more bushings. But these brass bushings, you know, they should really just kind of tap in to place. Kind of snug. You know, if they're too loose, I've actually had it to where I've actually had to add weld on the inside of these hinges and then re-drill them and then fit it to where this new piece is pretty snug. But if the hinges aren't so far gone, a lot of times you can get away without doing that, at least for a while. You know, it's a cheap little upgrade. It probably won't last as long as a new hinge, but it should be close if it's done right. And on the lower hinge, those springs are another trick to put in. So I'll go ahead and get these cut out and beat out, and I'll get the other hinge off the door, and I'll show you exactly what I did to get that spring in and how I like to fit these and some of the extra tools I used. Okay, so I've got the lower door hinge out. The lower door hinges are the ones with the springs on them. I do this all the time, kind of, and I didn't know that off the top of my head. I have to go look at things. You know, you just never remember everything. There's so many things when you're doing entire vehicles that you just can't remember everything all the time. But you know, these are kind of tricky because a lot of times these might not look like they have a problem, and the reason that is because the detent roller here and the spring is kind of locking it. But I know once this spring is removed that this is way wobbled out. When the door is on the car, an easy way to check that, you know, is you open up the door, you know, pretend it's on the car, and just lightly lift on the end of it. You'll feel it. It'll go clunk, 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 clunk as you lift, you know, the bottom of the door. You go clunk, 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 and you'll feel it. And that's when you know your pins and bushings are bad. Once they start going bad, they go bad quick, and they just get worse and worse and worse. You know, that by the time they're ovaled out like that, it's just putting more weight and pressure and just ovaling those things out. So I'm going to take the spring off. Now, I bought this at Harbor Freight. It was cheap. It's dangerous. The hardest part of this whole job, outside of after you've got the hinges off the car, is getting these springs on and off, believe it or not, in a lot of ways. This thing works pretty good. It's not the easiest thing to use, and you still have to be very careful because once this compresses this spring down a little bit, and you're not going all the way, you're just getting it out just enough so you can get the spring out. Wear gloves, wear glasses. I even keep my hand over it. That way if the spring does pop out, it doesn't, you know, gain velocity and just hit me in the face or something weird. because it flies around. This works for me. They probably make a lot nicer ones. This is just one I bought a while back, and it seems to work, you know, for the few times I've done this here recently. So I'll take this spring off first, and then I'll show you what this looks like and how ovaled out it really is. Okay, so I got that spring off. It was pretty quick, but it's just dangerous. You know, these Harbor Freight things, it's just, that is what it says, door spring tool, right? But it just, there's no way to really clamp the spring in it, so when it does compress, it's just really tricky because you have to compress it and wiggle it out of there. And, you know, like I said, I have a glove on, and I kind of keep my hand over that way. If it pops out, it hits me in the glove, and it's not flying across the room, because and I know it doesn't look like much, but once that thing gains velocity, it'll fly. So that's the dangerous part of this, and why, if you have the money, go buy hinges. Don't get me wrong. If you don't, and you're handy and you want to try something, this works. But now that the spring's out, you can see how much that hinge wobbles, right? So the bushings in here are just toast. So I'm going to go ahead and do the next step. Probably not show videoing it, but it's going to take some effort, you know. I'm going to cut this off on this side. The other side has the flat head on it. You know, that's where it's kind of pressed in there a little bit. I'm going to cut this off, and then I used a punch tool, a couple different punches in my sledgehammer, and put it in my vise, and I was able to get them out. If that doesn't work, I have had to try to press these out with the press. That works. You can also drill them out too. You know, once you drill down the center of this, you don't need to drill completely the same exact diameter as the pin, but get close. It relieves the tension around the pin, and it won't look like it does it, but it does. It'll shrink, you know, just enough. So I had pretty good luck on these ones, just using the vise hammer method rather than trying to go over my press and deal with it. You know, the other thing you need to do is when you're pressing these out, you need to make sure these tabs are well supported, because you can see this tab is actually bent out slightly. You know, when we put the new bushings in, you'll see that I'll probably end up putting this in the vise and squeezing it back together slightly. So let's get these apart, and I'll kind of show you what they look like as they go together. Okay, so I've got those hinges done. You know, they turned out really nice. I've got, you can actually see here where I've got the new bushings in place. I've got the detent pin in, it's got the keeper and the Allen in place, springs in place, so it's really good. I did end up pressing this inner portion of the hinge in slightly, because it was a little extreme there, and just to kind of get it nice and tight here and snug with this new brash portion in here and in here on the flange of those bushings. Like I had said earlier in the video, you know, if this inner portion of this hinge is so wobbled out that these bushings don't fit snug, I'd recommend welding them. Welding the hinges first and then drilling them out. You can get bigger bushings as well. They're aftermarket. You're going to have to go to the auto parts store or something to find something bigger. I think adding steel to them and then putting in the correct bushings are probably the right way to go. But yeah, these turned out really nice. You know, there's a couple things. These hinges might not swivel really easily, which is fine. By the time you get the weight of the door and everything on there, it's going to be perfect. You can see that I've got my clearances. The hinge looks pretty straight and clear of any major rubbing. And you know, they're not easy to move. You know, with the weight of the door and everything else, it's supposed to be snug. You don't want your doors to wobble once it's open. If you can lift on that door and you can feel a wobble, there's a problem. Another thing I thought was kind of interesting. So I bought new hinges for my '68 Camaro that I didn't have hinges, so I went ahead and bought them. But these are like aftermarket hinges that look identical to what I just did, basically. You can see the Allen there on the detent pin, and you can also see the keeper and the bushings in there the same exact way that I've just done what I've done. In fact, I don't even think these are as tight as what I've just done. You know, and you want to save a few bucks. I want to say that hinge kit, pin kit was probably 30 bucks, 20, 30 bucks on Summit. These things, you know, by the time you get 4 hinges, you got 55 for the lower and 50 for the upper. You know, you're $210 plus tax by the time you get those done. Whereas if you have hinges, you know, I'd always recommend using the stock components. These are actually better, just as good if not better than what I just bought, and it cost them 30 bucks. And you know, I probably spent an hour and a half doing this. So that's a way to go. Another quick thing, there's actually a lot of movement in these. You know, when you go to put your doors on and you're trying to adjust your body lines and everything else, you know, these are where the hinges hook in, and obviously these are the components of the car that move around. You know, they give you your movement to line all the body lines up to get it crisp with that body line that's in the car there. and the front fender here, and obviously the front fender has a lot of movement as well. There's a lot to lining these cars, but at some point you can max out on these hinges. There is one other key thing that I'm not going to go into on this stuff, but you can actually bend the hinges. They actually make a tool that hooks onto the door, and you can actually bend the door into place. I actually haven't had to do that on any of the cars I've done. When I did my 69 or my 68 Firebird, it wasn't needed. So when I bolt these on, if for some reason I bolt this thing on after I bolt the fenders on and I'm lining things up, if I can't get it perfectly, there's a whole nother thing. You can read about it online that you can get it lined up, because you want this body line and this roll to match with the roll in the bottom of the door. Let's see, I got a door here. So you can see that roll in the door is going to have to line up perfectly with the roll here. And you're also going to be looking at the top of the door, to make sure this all lines up. There is a ton to lining panels that I'm not going to go over, but that is another component of this. After you've done all this work, you might need to bend these hinges. These are actually flexible, especially you get the weight of the door on there, everything else bolted up as best you can, line it up as best you can. If you need to bend it, you can. So anyways, I hope there's a little bit of information on how at least I did the hinge pins on this car and how I like to do them. Done it a few times now, so I haven't really seen a whole lot about it online, at least in that much detail when it comes to just specifically the pins and the springs. So hey, if you like this video, hit like and subscribe, and thanks for watching.